Donald Trump was entitled to the presumption of innocence. He received it. Donald Trump was entitled to a trial by a jury of his peers. He received it. Donald Trump was entitled to a vigorous defense. He received it. That is an affirmation of the American judicial system. This is America. We are not a system that is occupied by a monarch or a king or a dictator. We are a democracy. And in a democracy, no one is above the law.
Hi again, everybody. It's now 5 o'clock in New York. It is one of the preeminent features of American governance that truly makes this country a democracy. That is what the leader said right there, the rule of law and the equal application of it. When it came to the first ever criminal trial of an American ex-president, the rule of law was followed. Evidence was presented, witnesses testified, and a jury of Donald Trump's peers reached a verdict, just like any other trial of any other American citizen. But a now convicted Donald Trump has only sharpened his attacks since that conviction against the rule of law, painting himself as a political prisoner of sorts, a target of a so-called politicized justice system. Trump has sown distrust in our institutions to make himself look better, to puff himself up, if you will. But the staying power of his attacks is only possible because the people in the Republican Party promote the attacks and the lies as well. Watch.
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace.
What happened there was outrageous. And you're right, the American people see it. This is a purely political exercise, not a legal one.
It's really the two-tier justice system that has so many Americans concerned about fairness in our country.
No, it doesn't. A lot of you weren't telling them that, lying to them. And it isn't just the justice system and the rule of law. Trump and the likes of his enablers that you saw there have sought to undermine another pillar of our democracy that holds all individuals accountable, the free press.
Fake news is all you get, and they are the enemy of the people.
The media is corrupt and complicit in this.
This media rigged the 2016 election. They rigged the 2020 election with the Hunter Biden laptop story. And they're going to rig this election.
I think it shows how low the media is willing to go to cover for Joe Biden.
I can't even rig traffic, as well as the ultimate check on any official's power in a democracy. Free and fair elections. Watch that.
We did lose. It was a rigged election. So they rigged the presidential election in 2020, and we're not going to allow them to rig the presidential election in 2024.
Will you accept the election results of 2024 no matter what happens, Senator?
No matter what happens? No, if it's an unfair election.
What would you have done if you were vice president? I would not have done what Mike Pence did.
I would not have done what Mike Pence did. What did Mike Pence do? Refused to overturn an election he lost. It's a terrifying portrait of cowardice, of political cravenness, and a worrisome pattern. And if you don't watch closely, you might not notice that it's getting worse. It's getting more extreme. The lies are going completely mainstream in the wake of Trump's conviction on Thursday. While the denigrations to our institutions are harmful, a vengeful Donald Trump poses an actual, immediate national security threat today. NBC News reports this, quote, Donald Trump could turn America's spy services into weapons of retribution against domestic political opponents. He could skew intelligence findings in favor of authoritarian leaders and undermine information sharing with U.S. allies if he wins a second term. That is according to more than a dozen former intelligence officers, Western officials, and lawmakers. The starkest of contrasts shaping up between the two major political parties, one that respects the rule of law, America's alliances, and the intelligence community, and the other whose leader and members have shown that they will do away with the fundamentals of our society, of our democracy, to save Trump. And where could that leave us if the latter is in power? Living in an autocracy right here in America. It could happen. It's where we start the hour. Some of our favorite experts and friends. Former CIA director, now MSNBC national security analyst John Brennan is here, plus the co-founder and executive director at Protect Democracy, Ian Bassin, is back, and former Trump impeachment manager, Congresswoman Madeleine Dean of Pennsylvania, is with us. Director Brennan, I start with you because the last time you were here, I think we talked about whether or not Trump should receive intelligence briefings once he is officially the nominee of the Republican Party. He's now a convicted felon. Do you still think he should?
No, I do not, Nicole. And I said previously that I thought that the Biden administration could give him essentially an unclassified intelligence briefing without any reference to source of methods to keep up the tradition for the last 70 years of providing a presidential candidate a briefing before the election. But now that he is a convicted felon, I do believe that he should not be entitled to that. Because if he were given such a briefing, I think it would minimize the significance of this conviction, the felony, as well as belittle the whole process. And clearly, Donald Trump has shown total disrespect and disregard for the rule of law. And so one of the things that I would offer to the Biden administration, if I were still in government, my recommendation would be to maybe offer an intelligence briefing to somebody within the Trump orbit, like a Robert O'Brien, a former national security advisor, who I do think is a person of integrity, but not to give it to Donald Trump himself. Because, again, aside from just the total disregard that he has shown for classified information when he left the White House, and Donald Trump never would have qualified for a security clearance at any time during his life. But once you're in the Oval Office, you, by the dint of that office, you get access to this country's secrets. But I certainly would think that the Biden administration is going to rethink their previous decision to offer him an intelligence briefing prior to the election.
Director Brennan, are we past the point of having like a WTF Republicans conversation? I mean, you had John Kelly afraid of Trump starting a nuclear war with North Korea by calling him Little Rocket Man. You had Mattis quit for cause over his policy around the border between Turkey and Syria. You had Milley averting through white-knuckle communications political instability on January 6th. I mean, the folks who had your old job grip the steering wheel with the whitest of white knuckles. Are we past the point where anyone can say to anyone in the Republican Party, like, you really want to do this again, guys?
Well, it seems like they do want to do it, despite, I think, the real concern that Donald Trump is going to weaponize the institutions of governance, law enforcement, justice, intelligence, and other types of things in order to advance his personal agenda. But it's clear that the members of Congress who have come out with these outrageous statements, again, denigrating the decision of 12 jurors in New York, it just shows not only that Donald Trump has this disregard for the rule of law, but Republicans almost across the board. And there are too few Liz Cheney's and others and Adam Kinzinger's and individuals who do have that integrity, who are willing to stand up to Donald Trump. But unfortunately, there are few and far between. And it appears as though the Republicans are willing to allow this travesty to be wrought upon our government by continuing to advocate for Donald Trump's presidency.
Ian